Okay, so if you've been on the internet like at all lately, you've probably seen headlines like this. And maybe, like me, you've become angry and it gives you like a gut punch. I spent years as a nurse on a pediatric cardiology unit where we did a lot of heart transplants in kids. I, before that, worked as a nurse on a kidney and liver GI unit. We did a ton of transplants on livers and kidneys. And this just pains my soul to see information like this, like posted, making these like stories that are so misleading. So today, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the process of an organ transplant, what these articles are saying, what the truth of them is, and then what they're kind of just like manufacturing drama over and what like why the rules are the way they are in terms of organ transplant. And hopefully you'll just learn a little bit about organ transplant. We will be able to squash some of these like wild, they make it sound so dramatic, and it's like when you look at it, it's not. Hopefully we'll learn a little and find a few things to laugh at. I always try to find a little bit of humor, but this is hard. I'm like, organ transplant is rough. All right, friends, let's dive in, see what's happening, and react to some of this. I am reacting blind, so I've never seen these. My sister sent them to me. I've read some of them, obviously, to raise my blood pressure and want to talk about this, but these ones she sent me, I haven't seen. So it will be a blind reaction. So if I evolve my comments along the way, it's just because I don't know what future me knows yet. Okay, so let's dive straight in and we're going to talk about the articles. Let's look at some of them and try not to get copyright striked. I feel like news stations really like to copyright strike people, so we're going to try really hard. If you are new here, I'm Liz. I'm a family nurse practitioner. Like I said, I worked bedside as a nurse in pediatric cardiology and GI liver stuff for a long time, so this is all near and dear to my heart. I am quite familiar with the transplant process because of all of this, so it's probably why it ruffled my feathers. All right, let's see what the people are saying. So this has been going on for quite some time. We can see that in October of 2021, they were talking about it. I know a recent one we're going to look at, she said was from a lot, more recent. I feel like every few months people bring this up and it becomes like a talking point about how awful the healthcare world is, that, we're such stick in the muds that we're denying people life-saving organ transplants because of they don't want to get a vaccine. And the reality of the situation is this has always been a rule, and we're going to kind of dive into that a little bit more, but let's look at the article. In Colorado Springs, when a Colorado woman found out her hospital wouldn't approve her kidney transplant surgery until she got the COVID-19 vaccine, she was left with a difficult decision, pitting her health needs against her religious beliefs. Leilani Lutani, a born-again Christian, went with her faith. So this is off the mark, like interesting to me. I don't understand where I hear this a lot, I heard this from my patients, and I see this on the internet. A lot of people are saying it's against their religious beliefs, but I haven't heard, I'm like, but what about it in the religious belief? I have not heard a good backup for it when people use that. Not to say that there's not one. If you have a religious belief that bars you from the vaccine, feel free to let me know below. And I mean that genuinely. I like to learn about opposing viewpoints. We're going to have different viewpoints in here that are not my own, just to kind of round out the article and to give us an idea of what other people are thinking so that it's not an echo chamber, because I think that's really important. Even amongst my own patients, I've never had someone be able to actually say, they were just like, oh, well, it's just against my religion. And I'm just curious, in a genuine way, I would like to know. And I don't know how religion suddenly got anti-vaccine. I know not all religion is, and that's in no way a blanket statement, but it's just, I see this a lot and it confuses me. Even though she had stage 5 kidney disease, so it's like the worst type of kidney disease, she's probably on dialysis, which is a machine that filters out the toxins in your blood. So it's just it's kind of like it's a filter. Essentially, you're running your blood through a filter. And at this point in stage 5 kidney disease, it's as bad as it can get. And your body needs something else to do it. So they're going to hook you up to a machine to do it several times a week. She is sick. She has stage 5 kidney disease that puts her at risk of dying without a new kidney. Yes. Because dialysis comes with its own set of risks. Infection is a huge one because you have to have lines in order to access the dialysis or the access sites. And it's not perfect, She would not agree to be vaccinated because of the role of the fetal cell lines played in some vaccine development. Oh, okay. So this is probably where the religion comes in. And this is I've had a lot of patients that have come to me and said that they don't want a vaccine that had anything to do with that culture line. So the fetal cells are decades old. They were taken from fetuses that were aborted. It wasn't aborted for the for the cells. They were just kind of donated. And then we've cloned them a bunch of times. And basically, they're used in science when you want to see, like, could this interact with how would it interact with a human cell without actually introducing it to like a live human? And so they use it for that. They use it for a culture medium to grow different things in, like when they're trying to make vaccines. That's how it got used in the Johnson and Johnson vaccine. It's used in things like ibuprofen. Most medicines that we have were actually like it was involved in those because it tested it in those cells first. But this is a very like I think it's a valid concern. I understand why some people are just like I want nothing to do with that. And I think as healthcare workers it's important to meet people where they're at with that. I've seen a lot like I'm not going to argue with you and try to change your mind. I can present you with the facts and say like, "Hey, this is what this actually is." But at the same time, like the bottom line is if that's not something you're comfortable with, that's fine. My job is literally to supply you with the information and you get to choose. However, if that is what you are choosing is you don't want anything associated with that, one, I would go and look at all the other things that fetal cell lines are used that you might be ingesting all the time. But two, get an mRNA vaccine because those had nothing to do with those fetal cell cultures because those are a totally different type of vaccine and they had nothing to do with it. So that's always an option is those mRNA vaccines, which is going to be the Moderna and Pfizer if you're in the United States. UC Health requires transplant recipients to be vaccinated because recipients are at a significant risk of contracting COVID-19 while being at the hospital and dying from the virus. Unvaccinated donors could also pass COVID-19 through the recipient, even if they initially test negative. Studies have found transplant patients who contract COVID-19 may have a mortality rate of 20% or higher. It's not clear how common this is. So what they're saying is if you get an organ transplant, you are at risk you have a 20% higher chance of dying, essentially, it sounds like, is what they're trying to say if you have an organ transplant. Okay, so what we just read was that people on the transplant organization, they are saying, hey, we want you to get this vaccine because you are more likely to die if you get COVID. And we want you to have the best chance of surviving, obviously. Let's just remove COVID from the mix, okay? Because it's going to give you a survival. What did they say? You're 20% more likely to die. Let's just remove that from the mix really quick and just look at diseases in general. So currently in the United States and worldwide, we have many, many, many more people who need organs than we have organ transplants available. I'll put all my sources listed down below in case you want to check them out. But here's some data just saying like over 100,000 people in the US are awaiting an organ transplant and 20 people a day are dying. I've seen numbers that are even way higher than that. But it is definitely something that we do not have enough organs per the people who really need these organ transplants. And for that reason, when they're evaluating you for an organ transplant, there's a huge checklist of things that you need to check off and have done before to optimize your chance of that organ sticking and you surviving, because they're saying like, this is such a precious resource that we want to make sure it is in the best possible hands and has the best chance of going the distance. They don't want to give this to someone. And, even if it's only like, it's a percentage of a chance that you might get this illness, and then it's another percentage of the chance that it might kill you. They want to minimize risk wherever possible. And that's what they're looking at when they're making these rules. So this hospital is not saying, hey, if you don't get this vaccine, you can't have this because it's our way or the highway. This is rules that have been set out and are applied nationwide. Almost all transplant programs are going to require you to be up to date on all of your vaccinations. Let's see these are the vaccines that we usually you'll see given. So before you have a transplant, you will need to get the influenza vaccine, the Tdap, the MMR, the varicella. All of these that are listed here I was going to list them all. And then I was like, no, I don't want to play this game. But these are all the ones that you're typically given before you have a transplant. And now they've added COVID-19 because it's all CDC approved vaccines is what the language is. Let's see what the Health and Human Services actually says. So an adult solid transplant candidate and recipient should receive all vaccines indicated based on their age, medical conditions, and other factors, except for the below listed conditions. And then it goes through them. So you would get everything that is recommended by the CDC prior to your transplant. So vaccine requirements in order to get an organ is not something that's new. Other things that people are going to get when they're going through an organ transplantation process is basically you get your name put on a list and then you have an evaluation by psychiatry. They make sure that you are in a sound enough mind in order to like care for this organ afterwards, because the process afterwards is absolutely brutal. You're going to be on you're going to be on immune suppression medication for your entire life. There's going to be certain restrictions, things that you cannot do. There's a lot of the emotional toll as well that comes with knowing that someone died. A lot of the times with kidneys, it's different. A lot of you can, or like a partial liver, but let's say like with a heart, you are getting an organ that you only got because someone else died. And there's a lot of emotional baggage and feelings with that. I saw that all the time in both like the kids who were old enough to process it, as well as with the adults who had to process like, oh my gosh, my child got this because some other parent is living their nightmare. So they evaluate for that. They make sure that you are, you have all of the connections you're going to need for the care going forward, that you have, your home is, you can store the medication, that you have a home environment that has electricity. They do such a comprehensive look at what your other medical conditions are, what your support system at home looks like. They go into all of these things because they want to make sure that this organ is going to someone who has, like I said, the best chance of it making it and going in the long haul. And so what we're talking about here is rejection. And I want to talk about that before we go on, just to give you an idea. So when you are giving an organ to someone else, everything in our body has these little ID badges on them, right? And it says like, when you're going into work or something and you might have an ID badge and it has the name of the company. So it would be like Liz. And so your body can see it, and then it can get specifically down and it'll say, I'm Liz and I am a pediatric nurse, like when I worked in the hospital. So it lists who you work for, which is yourself. All your organs are going to have your name on it. They're like, I work for Liz and I am the liver. I work for Liz and I am the lung. They have little ID badges on them. This is actually very similar to how we work with vaccines, is we trick things into the body that like try to slide by and be like, hey, I'm part of the body. And that's how they get in. So everything has a name tag. Your name tag is specific to you, and your body's immune system is trained to filter through all the different name tags that it sees in your blood, in all of your organs, and make sure like everyone that's here is supposed to be here. And if you're not here, if you don't have a Liz name tag, you're getting zapped and you're going away. The problem here is that if you're giving me Susan's liver, Susan's liver is going to have Susan's name tag on it. Okay. And there's no way that we have yet to change the name tag on it. We're going to try to match it by blood type. And that's when you hear of people matching with their donor, is they try to match as many things compatibility wise with like blood type and different antigens associated with that. They're going to like your ID badge. Maybe mine is like pink and it has Liz on it. And maybe hers is like hot pink and it has like a couple glittery sparkles on it. It's close, but it's not quite enough that your body would still see it and be like,
you weren't supposed to be here, Susan.
So what we're going to do after you get your organ transplant is they're going to give you immune suppression medication that you will be on forever, because your body will always recognize Susan as not being your own liver. And you're going to be on these medications that basically turn your immune system down to almost off, so that there are fewer security guards inside your body searching for name tags and hoping that it can get by. When you hear of an organ rejection, it's because your body sniffed it out and it said, you're not Liz, you're Susan. And it cuts off the blood supply to it. It attacks it, literally like it would attack a virus or a bacteria, except it is your organ. And the treatment is squash the immune system. When we squash the immune system, it's great for when we don't want our body to attack ourselves or our new Susan liver. It's not good, though, if all of a sudden we're introduced to infection or any kind of virus or bacteria or something that we would normally want those security guards to find. And so that is why we're going to try to set you up in the best way possible, give you the vaccines beforehand so that maybe your body can remember a little bit. Even though we're totally squashing your immune system, you would have maybe an inkling of remembering, like that one security guard that's still circulating might remember what it's looking for and be like, oh, I've seen you before. Let's call as many people as we can and deal with this, or hopefully, and treat it before it even gets started. And that is the hope with vaccinating people prior to organ transplant, because they will not have enough of an immune system to mount a response after transplant. And even the simplest things can kill organ transplant patients. We used to tell our kids and that would go home with new hearts, you cannot, like, those parents would not go outside in the cold and flu season months. And I'm not kidding you. Like they had, one parent was kind of designated the person that goes out and runs groceries. And these people, they stayed inside. And let me know if you are a patient who has experienced this or you have a loved one who is, if that was your experience as well, because it's taken so seriously. And so it's not new. It is not new that we require vaccines. It is not new that they're saying, I want you to be in the best possible place no matter what, like to be here. So I totally understand when people say it doesn't seem fair, that you've been on the list, you've waited, you've done all the other things, but this is the one thing you're declining. It's like I see how people are like, oh, that's unfair. It's my body, it's my choice. But when there are so few resources, they're always going to give it to the person who is willing to check every single box to make that organ go the farthest, because if we had a lot more, if we had to opt out of organ donation, which I think this leads to a whole different struggle that we really should be targeting most of our frustration at is why don't we make it an opt-out system with organ donation? We would have so many more organs to donate and so many more lives saved. But we are an opt-in. So you have to say, yes, I want to be an organ donor, not no, I don't want to be. If we had more organs, might have enough to be able to say, hey, I don't want to get that vaccine. And they would say, okay, but you've checked every other box. So this is okay. Like we're still going to give it to you. We're in such a desperate place with organs that there are so many people who are willing to tick every single box and give it the organ the absolute best chance they can. They are not going to give it to someone who's not willing to check every box also because they want it to have the best chance. I think it also, probably sets off, this isn't from like studies or whatever. This is just for my my own opinion. I think with an organ transplant, I've seen many fail. And I've seen the repercussions and the frustration that comes with that for when people do not, like when I worked on a liver floor, you get a new liver, you have to take your suppression meds and you aren't supposed to drink alcohol ever again, whether or not your liver transplant was necessarily for, alcohol overuse. But I have seen so many people come back in and they, with their second liver, they've kind of repeated the same process and were there. And the frustration that other people feel and that I have felt knowing that this person got a liver and then they drink, they went back into, they were drinking a lot again, or they were using particular substances that again led to liver failure. And then you have people that you build relationships with who die because they were unable to get a liver. Like I've had situations just personally, I think this is why it affects me, like gets me so upset. I've had a patient that was so dear to our unit and he was on there for a very long time. He was number 2 on our transplant list in the area. And the number 1 person got the liver. Number 2, he passed away very shortly after not receiving the organ. And the person at the top of the list did not take any of their rejection meds. They also had some substance use things that went into play there, but their organ failed within a year and a half and they were back. And it was just so frustrating. And you could see the team was demoralized by it. And it was just incredibly difficult. I'm smiling because it just makes me sad. And that's how I cope. I'm not actually happy. It was really hard. And I know that like addiction is a disease and everything. And I'm not in any way minimizing that. I'm just saying like it's being on the other end of seeing people die and suffer because an organ was given to someone, who didn't take the best care of it. I understand why they want to place these precious resources in those hands. Okay. I've probably driven that point home. Okay. Let's go back to our original story, but hopefully you get an idea now more of like why vaccines are required pre-transplant, that this isn't just like a punitive thing, how precious the resources are. And I don't know, just like a different perspective. If you were someone who was really, really turned off by this, maybe you've seen it a slightly different way. Let's go back over and see. It says it's not clear how common this policy is. The American Hospital Association said it did not have data to share on the issue, but many transplant programs insist that patients get vaccinated for COVID because of the weakened state of the immune system. So the way we have organ transplants in the United States is also a little bit confusing. We can very briefly look at that. Organ transplantation, it really started in like the 1980s. How cool is that? Like until the 80s, we didn't really have like a whole plant, like a way to, suppress the immune system so the organs would just get immediately rejected. So after we figured out how to do organ transplants in the 80s, the Health Resource and Service Administration came out with the National Organ Transplant Act in 1984, and it gave the power to decide, because you might be like, who gets to decide on these things? Like, who decides which vaccines it is? The Health Resource and Service Administration is. HRSA, they're in charge of many, many things. Healthcare related in our country is a government agency that provides oversight of organ recovery and transplantation through the Organ Procurement and Transplantation Network. And the Procurement and Transplantation Network kind of, like they said, they coordinate who they're getting organs from and where they're going to. And they actually, I thought this was interesting. You can share your voice at an upcoming meeting, learn about providing feedback on proposals of organ allocation as who gets the organ. So you can actually like have an opinion and send it to them and be like, this is how I think we should divide up the kidneys, like, which is cool. I mean, morbid, but very cool that you can have a say in that. And so what they kind of do is they go through, and it's regional. They are constantly changing how they decide. Sometimes it's by state and sometimes it's just by region. It's different for every single organ. Every organ has its own like board, and it's a weird process. We could always talk about it a different day. It's not super important for this video, but that is who decides. So they get to say, hey, we think this should be like across the board. And then usually the individual, they make the recommendation, which their recommendation is everyone, like these people have said, like the recommendation is every CDC applicable one vaccine they should get, as well as the psychiatry and the counseling and everything else, the social work visits that should go along to prepare a person for this big event. And each individual transplant program at a hospital can decide what they're actually going to enact. And almost every single one, I think this article said something about one in Alabama was not requiring it. Did I see that in my peripheral vision? Some healthcare systems recommend or strongly encourage vaccination for transplants, including the Mayo Clinic and Sentara Health. The University of Alabama Birmingham School of Medicine transplant program only recommends that living donors receive a vaccine. This does not require it for the donation process. Okay, so in the rest of this article is just talking about, the different, I think it said the Pope said it was fine to get the vaccine, and that Lutani is going to search in other states that might not, those transplant programs may not have the requirement that they would need this updated vaccine. I would pretty much guarantee that they have some kind of a vaccine requirement, but they might not have the COVID one. Okay, now let's look at some different articles. Probably should have done this live and then you could have asked questions, but I'm only thinking of that now, so it's totally fine. It's probably good that I'm not doing it live. My last one went so long. I have no self-control about tangents. Okay, let's look at this one. So this is a video clip from Fox.
Punishing patients who refuse to take Joe Biden's mandated injection.
I don't know if we can watch this one. There was so much to unpack there. Punishing is never, it's not punishing. It's setting a requirement. And if you aren't willing to meet the requirement for, a punishment would be like, you can't have your blood pressure medicine. I don't know. Okay, there's a lot to unpack there. We might not be able to watch this one. It might be too much for me. Punishing is not the word that I would use. I would say if you set out a set of rules and you say, hey, these are what you need in order to get this, whatever it is in life, hey, do this, and then you can have that. It's the rules. It's not a punishment.
He was about to receive one. And then Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston, one of the most famous hospitals in the world, said he can't have one because he hasn't gotten the shot.
Okay, so I don't want to get super crazy copyright claimed for showing this video, but basically what this person is saying is that this person was in line for an organ transplant and they do not want to get the COVID vaccine. They're at Brigham and Women's Hospital, and they basically said, like, you can't, you need this to save your life, but you cannot get it. I believe it's for a heart transplant if you don't get the vaccine. And this person's upset.
There is no medical justification for this rule at all.
What? The medical justification for the rule is what we just went over, that your immune system is going to be squashed afterwards. And we want you to have any kind of a fighting chance. And this is going to boost your chances of survival. So vaccines boost chances of survival because you're less likely to get like more sick. It's not a guarantee. This is not like an out of the park thing where it's like, oh, look, like you're never going to get COVID if you get the COVID vaccine. We know that is not true at this point for this variant, but it gives you any points. It gives you a few points of safety. And in this game, it is very life or death. And we will take any points. It just doesn't make any sense. That would be like, football season. So it would be like being like in a game and you're like, oh wow, it's really tied. Like, but I don't want your stupid field goal points. Like I only want I only want it if it's going to be a full touchdown. No, you're going to take the 3 points of the field goal and add it and be like, hey, any leg up is great. Do you like my attempt at a sports reference?
This man poses no threat to anyone.
Okay, so I think he's trying to come at it from the angle of like he's not going to spread COVID to anyone, which is just a complete misunderstanding of why we vaccinate people who are going for organ transplantation. I'm not worried about him giving it to me. I'm worried about him getting it and having no immune system to fight it, whoever you are. I don't like you. I do not like this person. I should say I don't like his words. I shouldn't say I don't like him. This is what I'm working on with my children. It's not that I don't like you. Maybe I do. I don't know you. I don't like your words. Also, the likelihood that you would get myocarditis with COVID is higher than myocarditis with the vaccine, but different talk for a different day. So I hate that. I hate everything about that. That is a good example of the media completely twisting the situation and what is happening and saying that they're punishing him and that there's no point. Oh, friends, and that science gives no points. Okay. So this one is on, what is this? The Today Show. Okay. So lots of people are watching that probably.
This morning, it's a race against time for DJ Ferguson.
A race against time. See how they're just like sensationalizing it?
The 31-year-old father of two with a third baby on the way desperately needs a heart transplant. DJ can't receive an organ donation because he won't get a COVID vaccine. Tracy says DJ is concerned about the shot's potential heart-related side effects.
So in this case, it's just like, this is what's so frustrating about like information being translated on the internet is you have to, with everything, you have to weigh risk and benefits. Yes, there are some signs that you have an increased risk of usually like, I think myocarditis, endocarditis with getting the COVID vaccine, especially being in a demographic. It looks like young men are at the most risk for that. Again, we have to balance it with your chance of having those events if you get COVID are higher than the percentage. It's harder though with the vaccine because people will be like, well, I'll take my chances with COVID versus like voluntarily taking a shot. But with something like this, you have to weigh the benefits. What is the benefit? What is the risk of getting myocarditis with a vaccine versus not getting an organ transplant? Like people have fear mongered it so much and made it such an issue that it's just like, you know what I mean? Like that we can't even look at it and say, hey, like this. Oh, and then he's so young. Oh, that is so sad.
The Mayo Clinic listed on their website the myocarditis, pericarditis, and blood clots.
For sure. And I think like they're not wrong, but I think it's all about, making a decision based on all the information and not just being like, hey, here's more risks. It's never in a vacuum. It's never like this has more risk. It's like this has more risks compared to everything else. And I feel like a lot of the arguments against that I've heard, at least so far in these, is like, oh, well, there's risks here. And it's like, you're not looking at the whole picture and seeing what the risks on the other side of the room are too.
Do you think the trade-off of a vaccine for a transplant might be worthwhile?
Well, if they can prove to us that it's not going to take his life.
And stuff like this is so hard. Like, oh, if you can prove to me that you're not going to die from it. There's no guarantees in medicine. That's one of the first things they tell you. Never promise things because you don't know. You literally have no idea how people's bodies are going to react to things. So never ever promise people. You can give them data. You should always back up everything, with statistics and everything, but never tell people like, oh yeah, you're guaranteed to survive this. This is going to be fine, because you just don't know.
In a statement, Brigham and Women's Hospital says they require several CDC recommended vaccines, including the COVID-19 vaccine.
Okay. Yeah. So just saying that. Okay. Let's look at maybe one more and then we will wrap up.
A life or death drama playing out right here in Charlottesville, Virginia.
Again, I mean, they're going to be able to use headlines like this. And this is what makes me so mad. Life or death drama. Like maybe if we just stopped making it so sensational.
A man wants a transplant, but does not want to get the COVID shot.
The patient at the center of it said he has stage 5 kidney failure. The doctor says to be active on the transplant list, Connors would have to get the COVID vaccine.
In that recording, you said that you were willing to die instead of getting.
Yeah, but I was just trying to prove the point was You're not going to convince me to get this thing. There's nothing on the planet that you're ever going to convince me to say why I should get this.
Okay, so in this individual, this man needs a kidney transplant. He has stage 5 kidney disease, and he's saying nothing, like we just saw, nothing would ever convince him to get it. And this is just, I feel like it's come down to so much. It's become political with the vaccine. It's become, there's no good information. Like, I do not understand why there has not been better information widely distributed. It just blows my mind. I'm like, who do we need to talk to? And like, to have someone who knows how to speak to people and not like spout, people come at it from such like a scientific gibberish point. Like, why don't we just have normal people explaining this on like everywhere, on all news sites, on everything? Like, why don't we educate on this better? Side tangent. Obviously, I'm passionate about it, but he's saying nothing would ever convince him to get it ever. So there's obviously such deeply entrenched fear, and he has not been presented with information probably, like, or had his questions answered. So now he feels like this, and now like this could kill him. And that is just so sad.
When I asked why he didn't want to get the vaccine, he says that nobody can guarantee he wouldn't have any adverse effects from it.
Okay, so this person is saying kind of the same thing. No one can guarantee I can't have adverse effects. And that's just like, yes, that's true. Like I said, we never promise people like, oh, you'll never have an adverse effect with this, like in anything in healthcare. However, we can talk about what will happen if you don't. And that's the flip side of it. And what would be more severe? Let's look at even the worst case scenario that yes, you get myocarditis, that all of the cases of myocarditis that we've seen with the vaccine, people have recovered. So there's that, like you'll recover. You aren't going to recover from not having kidneys. That's not recoverable. So just kind of weighing pros and cons. I think people really like to paint it as a black and white picture. Obviously, we don't live in a vacuum. Our choices always have a flip side to them. So every action, there's a consequence. There's some kind of physics Newton law in there somewhere. And no one's ever saying it's a vacuum. They're just saying like, look at both sides. But then I've seen a lot of people argue that like, oh, well, I said I would get it. You just have to promise me no side effects. And it's like, that's not possible. All right, let me head over to Instagram really quick and just see what people sent me over there. Never mind. Everyone on Instagram so far that has replied has agreed that like this is an extenuating circumstance, even if they don't think that the vaccine should be mandated across the board, which I don't either. I have a whole video on that. I think that we should focus our efforts on educating in an approachable way that really addresses people's fears and acknowledging that the vaccines are not perfect and that we should never force people to have to do something like with their body unless it's like a situation like this. But again, you're not being forced. It's more of a choice. Like, hey, these are the requirements. You have to meet them. And this is what I would say be an extreme case where the data is very clear that without an immune system, even the smallest things can kill you. So we really don't want that to happen and someone else not to get an organ, that could have lived with it. But I'm pretty much other than that you get to make your own choices. I just think we've done a terrible job helping people make providing them the information to make informed choices, but everyone agreed on me on my Instagram. So if you want to follow over there, that's where I do a lot of these polls and get a lot of my insight. I will leave my handle here, but this was an interesting look at this. Got a little frustrated there with a few of them. I think it's important to remember that just look when you see these sensational headlines, really look into it and say, is this actually different than what we've already done? Because I've seen that so many times with so many different things within this whole pandemic world is like, no, this is just what we've always done. And this is why. There's probably a good reason people have just been able to sensationalize it. And that's not very helpful. So hopefully you learned a little bit of something. If you have questions about organ donation, if you have experienced one, or if you have a loved one who has and you want to make any comments below, let me know. And if you want to just discuss and give your opinion, you are welcome to do that. I ask you to do it in a respectful way, but I always do welcome all different sides of conversations. Because like I said in the beginning, I do not want to live in an echo chamber. And because obviously my world, on Instagram all says pretty much everyone said, even if I don't agree with universal mandates, it makes sense why it's for organ transplants. Even my world, which usually I have a pretty diverse opinion population coming in, is pretty unanimous on this. So, and you don't have to agree. I think that's when we're going on a lot of tangents here, but I feel like people are afraid of getting outside opinions other than their own. It's not like it's going to change my mind. I think this is the right way to do things, but anyway, hope you learned a little bit of something. If you would like more videos of reaction type things like this, let me know what you would like me to react to or discuss. Hope you learned a little bit. I don't think we really got any laughs in, but I'll make up for it on a different day, except for my like awkward, like smiling because I'm uncomfortable laughter. All right, I'm going to stop rambling now. I hope you have a lovely day, and I will see you next